Okay, welcome. This week we are going to be talking about major minerals. So last week we talked about vitamins, which, if you remember, are organic molecules that play a role in different functions in the body. This week we'll be talking about minerals, and minerals are similar to vitamins, except vitamins are organic and minerals are inorganic. And we divided minerals into two different classifications, major minerals and minor minerals. So the major minerals include sodium, potassium, calcium, phosphorus, chloride. See if I got them all. Phosphorus and magnesium and sulfur. And the rest of the minerals are minor minerals. Okay, so if you remember, the minerals are elements in our body. Okay, so sodium, and if you recall from general chemistry, sodium is Na, which is that's not sodium, but I think it comes from a different language. So sodium is very important. It plays a role in maintaining the electrical balance in our cells. So one of the important roles is in neurons. So neurons are electrical cells, and they communicate by sending electrical signals, little signals. And it's that the sodium is actually carrying the charge in the neuron. So that carries the electrical charge because it has that plus to it. So sodium enters the neuron, and that causes the electrical signal to go down the neuron. Okay. So it's also the same thing happens in muscles. Muscles are also electrical, and if you contract the muscles, sodium is also important in that as well. Okay. So sodium, we get most of our sodium from salt, table salt, and very few people have sodium deficiency, but many of us have too much sodium. And some people are salt sensitive and some people are not salt sensitive. And the biggest thing that salt can do is affect blood pressure. So having too much salt in some people can cause blood pressure problems. And that's really serious. So if you have high blood pressure, then this really causes your heart to work a lot, because the heart kind of functions on pressure. And if the pressure is already high, it just really makes the heart work harder, and it affects many different functions in your body. So that could eventually cause heart disease and stress on your heart. So a lot of foods have high salt. And if you ever go to the grocery store, look on the labels and you'll be shocked. Some of them can be, 1,500, 2,500, which is much more than what you need, 2,500 milligrams. So like the average daily adult might have 3,400 milligrams or 3.4 grams of salt. That's a lot, in a diet. But you should, in general, they say about 1,500 milligrams. So if you measure out 1,500 milligrams, it's really not, it's not a half a salt shaker. It's like a teaspoon. So it's not a lot at all. So if you just think about how much you use, and then how much is in your food. And even if you don't use a lot of salt in your food, you're probably getting a whole lot from the foods that you eat. So really keep an eye on foods with a lot of salt. And it's also surprising that it's in so many different foods. So canned soup, frozen dinners, bacon, snacks, all contain a lot of salt. And even some odd things also have salt. So you really want to reduce the amount of salt in your diet. And then, so I know once you get used to a lot of salt, you're used to it. But if you just start to not use a lot of salt, you really don't miss it. It takes time, but eventually you won't miss it. Okay. One of the important functions of sodium is maintaining that balance in our body. So sodium helps get glucose into the cell. So these are transporters, and this is on the cell. So sodium can help glucose go into the cell. And also sodium is important in the sodium-potassium pump. So as I mentioned, the sodium is important for neurons to get, when it comes in, it adds a charge. But then we have to get the sodium back out, and that is done by the sodium potassium. It's called sodium potassium ATPase. And that's because it requires ATP or energy to move the sodium out and the potassium in. So your body actually uses a lot of energy to do this function. So a lot of the food that you actually eat, the energy from the food that you eat, comes from, is important because it actually is used just in this pump alone. So most of your work is right here, is moving sodium out and potassium back in. Okay, so as I mentioned, blood pressure is really important. So a normal blood pressure should be about 120 systolic, and that means the highest amount that is pressure, over 80 systolic, which is the lowest. So eating a diet in low salt will help decrease your high blood pressure. Another way that your body maintains sodium is by the hormone aldosterone. So when sodium levels are low, this little hormone, which is made in the adrenal glands, and that's located right on top of your kidneys. I know it kind of looks weird, doesn't it? But it's an endocrine gland that's located right on top of your kidneys. It actually has two parts, an outside part and an inside part. It's the outside part that makes the aldosterone. And then the aldosterone is produced and that in the adrenal glands, and its effect is in the kidneys, and that's going to help get the sodium into the blood so that you won't have low sodium. Okay, and when sodium levels return, the aldosterone is inhibited and it's not secreted, and then the sodium is not reabsorbed. Okay, so as I mentioned, the normal diet, you should have about 1,500 milligrams of sodium, but there are a lot of things that have a lot of high sodium. So that includes pickles, surprisingly. I know you wouldn't think they were high in sodium. And then ham. Of course, ham and bacon have a lot of sodium. So, and then some other things that don't have sodium, such as some cheeses. And I know that's surprising too. Rice, for example. So it's good to at least look at how much sodium you're eating. Okay. And it's also very important to know what your blood pressure is. And you should get it checked if you're younger, every so often. If you're a little bit older, over maybe 40, you should get, measure your blood pressure more often than that. And even now in drugstores, you could just go up, and even grocery stores, and get your blood pressure taken. I think they have those free machines. And even if you're a little bit older than that, it doesn't hurt to get a blood pressure cuff and then measure your own blood pressure, because it's not that expensive. And then once you buy it, you don't ever have to worry. And then you can get an eye on your blood pressure and see if there's anything that causes you to have high blood pressure. Okay, such as final exams. Okay, so the next one is potassium. And potassium is also positively charged. And it also plays a role in muscle and brain function. So usually it's the sodium comes in and potassium goes out. It also plays a role in blood pressure as well. And it can play a role in kidney stones. So things that are high in potassium include fruits such as bananas, vegetables, legumes, and unprocessed foods. So you can also have high blood potassium or low blood potassium. So both are not good. So maintaining the level of potassium is also very important. And some people think that controlling potassium may play a role in heart disease as well. Okay. And the third one is chloride. So that's the opposite of, not opposite, but the molecule that's with the sodium. It's sodium chloride. So chloride is negatively charged. It also plays a little bit of function in the brain and the stomach. So it makes hydrochloric acid. So chlorine is also important. And again, we don't have deficiency in chlorine we eat salt. Okay. Another really important mineral is calcium. So we hear all the time about the importance of calcium and that it's important, especially in bone growth. So when you were a child, it was important for you to have milk and other foods that are high in calcium. And it's still true now. So you still need a good amount of calcium because your bones they're I always thought they were boring, but they're not. They're alive and they're dynamic and they're always changing. And you actually have your peak bone density when you're about 24 or 25. So if you are already that age, that's about as thick as your bones are going to get, probably. So the more you can build up your bones until that age, the better you'll be when you're older. So doing things like eating healthy and exercising, those will build your bones and make them stronger. So the more you do weight-bearing exercise, such as weightlifting or other things like that, that will increase the bone density, and then that will be better and you'll be less likely to break your leg. Okay. So calcium is very important. And it's also very controlled. Calcium also plays a role, again, in neurons and other cells. So it signals inside cells. So it's turned on and it tells the inside cell, turns on different molecules, different enzymes. So calcium is important signaler in the cell as well. Okay, and it's tightly controlled because the body really needs a certain amount of calcium all the time. So when there is low calcium and when there's high calcium, different hormones are released, and both of those hormones are found on the thyroid gland or the parathyroid gland. So the thyroid gland is located in your throat, in your neck. It actually kind of looks like this, like a butterfly. So this is the thyroid gland, and if you look kind of closely, you see 4 little dots, and those are the parathyroid glands. So we have the thyroid and the parathyroid glands. And it's the parathyroid that produces a hormone called the parathyroid hormone. I guess, I don't know, luckily they didn't come up with something more complicated. They always come up with complicated names, like, oh, how can we remember that? But luckily this one is easier. So it's the parathyroid gland that's stimulated to secrete parathyroid hormone that then goes into the kidneys and tells the kidneys when the when there's low blood calcium to retain the calcium, so we're not going to excrete it out. It also is going to go to the bone, and if you don't have enough calcium, it's going to start taking calcium from your bone. So that's not very good at all. It also increases stimulates the action of vitamin D or calcitrol, and the calcitrol increases the absorption of calcium from the intestine. So it does 3 different things. It prevents calcium from getting excreted in the urine. It increases the absorption in the intestine through calcitrol, and if you really need a lot of calcium, it's going to take it from your bones. So that's why it's important to still now eat enough calcium. Okay. But if you have lots of calcium, if you just ate like a giant bowl of ice cream or took a lot of calcium supplements, then on the thyroid gland, another hormone is going to be released, and that's calcitonin. So calcitonin will, if you have too much calcium, it's going to say, oh, that's great, let's store it in case we need it. So it's going to tell the cells in your bone to store calcium. So it causes the bone building and remodeling in the bone. Okay, so we're going to take it and put it in the bone, and then we're going to tell the kidneys, okay, we really don't need that much calcium, so it's okay if you excrete it out. Okay, and then we're going to make a little less calcitrol, so then we're not going to absorb all of it in the small intestine. Okay. So it's a nice balance. So your body really works a lot like that. So sometimes if something is too high, it does one thing. If it's too low, then it does something else. And so this is a good example of both. Of one hormone being activated when it's high and another too low. Okay, let's do another tape.